on two wheels this week, a close look at tyre production and a double bike test. We ride Yamaha's new Fazer and Suzuki's new TL1000R. Also a chance for you to win tickets to this year's NEC show.
What's the most important part of a bike to you? Is it the engine? Is it the frame? Or is it the brakes? Or is it the tyres? Because without tyres, you're not going to be able to start, you're not going to be able to steer, you're not going to be able to stop. Well, we're here at Cooper Avon Tyres to see how they turn a block of this into those black hoops you see on the wheels. And to do the job, or the man who's going to tell us about the job, is Leo Smith, who is their technical products manager. Leo, when I picked this up earlier, I thought it was a piece of bread pudding, but it's not, is it?
No, it's not a leftover from the canteen, Jeff. What you've got there is a piece of pure, natural rubber.
Okay, and so this is it in its raw state then before we see it in its black form. So how does it get into this sheet form that we see behind us? Where does the black come from for a start up?
Right, well this noisy area we're in now, this is the mixing department for the factory. This is where we turn this type of rubber into rubber suitable for tyres. And we add various amount of chemicals into the rubber, and we also add the carbon black, which gives the rubber the sort of properties that we want.
Right. Do you sort of melt this or something? I mean, how's it all mixed up? Do you go into a big witch's cauldron or something, or what?
Basically it does, yeah. Basically it does. And then we add all the chemicals to it there, and that turns it then from being natural rubber into what we call a polymer. And all tyres are made from polymer materials. I've
got to put this down a minute, it's heavy, isn't it? So you've mixed all this stuff, and then to get it into these sheets, how is that actually done into the sheet form? I mean, is it spread out, going through rollers, or someone with a big rolling pin, is it, or what? How do we get to that?
Very similar to that. We'll show you that next to do a different part of the factory, but next it has to go through a machine called a banbury.
Right. Rubber without any fabric, Leo, that's no good for a tyre, is it? You just have this expanding inner tube, wouldn't you, really? So is that what this machine's all about?
That's right. This is the process we call calendaring, and this is where we make up all our angled breaker ply. And basically we start with a sheet like this, and we have to run it through this machine and keep it at a constant tension and speed. We add a rubber topping to it, and then we cut that into strips, and that's the belts they put into tyres. This is where we actually make the belts.
So is it made in a sandwich construction, or what? How do you get the rubber onto this fabric? Is that through a press or what?
It's very much similar to the Banbury processes that you've already seen.
Yeah.
And if we go down the route of this machine, you'll see these being added in stages.
It's like a paper mill, isn't it, really, with all this?
It's very similar to a paper mill.
Yeah, and then the two come together, squeezed, and that's it.
That's right. They're heated and fused together.
We've now seen the basic rubber production, the black stuff as it were, but these beads you were telling me about earlier, these are the actual beads that are in the sort of base of the tyre, aren't they? So how do we go about making those?
Right, well the bead is obviously the way in which we secure the tyre to the wheel. The beads are made from steel, and I have a bead here.
You have to have one there, yeah.
And as you can see, this is made from several strands of steel wrapped around and coated in rubber. There's no join in a bead. It's basically in effect like a spring.
Yeah.
And we make this in this area of the factory here, and this is what holds the tyre onto the wheel.
And then that's covered in rubber.
And that's covered in rubber.
Yeah.
What we then do to that for a motorcycle tyre, excuse me.
I wondered what you were doing for a
So did I for a second. Was this is quite an important piece of a motorcycle tyre.
Yeah.
This piece of rubber here is called the bead filler.
Right.
And that sits in the sidewall of the tyre above the bead area in this section here.
Right, so it's that fatter section, that bottom bit.
That's right. And that gives you a great deal of the properties of the stiffness of the sidewall of the motorcycle tyre. So it's obviously quite important.
And this is the start of the actual tyre construction, isn't it? You get the bead, you get the filler, and then you build up the rest.
That's right. So we're halfway to the part now where we've got the components we need to actually build the tyre.
Well, it's good to sit down here, Leo. How many miles have we walked so far?
Well, I don't know, it's a big place, isn't it?
Very well is. What have we got here then? This is, I can recognise the beads in there and the breakers and all the rest of it and this fabric, but what do we call that section? What have we got?
Right, now we've added our beads and all our plies, and this is now a basic tyre casing. This is actually an Azzaro casing for the new Azzaro sports tyres. So what we need to do now to finish that tyre off is we need to add a circumferential belt, which we add with a special winding process, and then we put a tread over the top of that.
Right.
And by the time we've done that, you end up with a finished built tyre. Then all we have to do is mould it.
Okay, so you put this on the winding machine, as it were, spin the fabric cords around it.
That's right, we put this on the machine, and then what the machine does then is it grips the tyre by the beads here,
Yeah.
and then inflates the casing and shapes it to the correct shape for the tyre. It then spins the tyre, and whilst it's spinning the tyre, it then adds the start of the cord, and it winds one continuous strand of cord all the way across the tyre to the other side. That's in effect the drive belt of this tyre.
Right.
Over the top of that, then we add the tread.
Then at the end of that, we end up with this, which is sort of recognisable as a racing slick, but it's not finished, is it?
No, that's just a finished casing now ready to be moulded. It's a finished tyre, but it now has to have all the detail added into the tyre.
So from that finished shell casing that we got there, we're now in the sort of tyre moulding part. We've seen the Azzaro set up, but why have you got two different sets of machines?
There are basically two different types of tyre moulding. The Azzaro tyre, being a new type of tyre technology, has its own type of moulding, which is we call segmental. But most tyres are actually cured in this type of moulding area. And these are two-piece moulds, what we call a clamshell mould, and because they open and close like a clamshell, and the tyres go into those moulds and they're forced into shape by heat, and all the detail in the sidewall and the tread pattern is added, and the rubber is cured for a time long enough that gives it the hardness of rubber that we desire for the tread, and then the tyre comes out of the mould into this area here and is allowed to cool for a while before it's moved.
We've already said, Leo, it is a very labour-intensive job, and here your guys, I didn't believe you at first, even though you're an honest guy, but they actually inspect every single tyre, don't they?
That's right, every single tyre we make has to be at this stage of the process. We've now built the tyres, we've cured the tyres, they're almost ready for sale here. But first of all, to visually improve the appearance of the tyre, I mean, you wouldn't want to buy a tyre with these things sticking out of it. No. We trim all these off, and the same guys that do the trimming, they're actually very highly trained, so that they can also quickly examine the exterior and the interior of the tyre to make sure it's absolutely as perfect as it can be, and then they stamp that tyre, and from there it goes on to distribution and on to be sold.
Well, can you give us a rundown on the numbers of this, what this tyre means, all the H's and all the rest of it, if we look at the side spec there?
Sure, and this is a 140/90 B16. The B designates that it's actually a bias belted tyre. Then it goes on to 77H. Okay, now that 77 relates to a figure on a scale to the amount of weight that the tyre can carry. I think 77 is somewhere up around about 300 odd kilograms. And then H is obviously the speed rating of the tyre, and H is obviously 130 miles an hour.
Obviously it is, yeah. And they go up. What do they start? Speed rating start at? What is H pretty well the lowest? Is it for bikes?
No, the lowest actually is I think A1, which is industrial or earth-moving tyres up to 2 miles an hour.
Not applicable to motorbikes.
Not applicable.
And then goes up to our friend the Z rated, which is for Mega Million, 190 miles an hour, is it, or 200 miles an hour?
Well, Z is a higher rating than that now. Yeah. W.
Is it?
And you'll get something now. A Z-rated tyre will also carry a W stamp if it's capable of doing more than say 270 kilometres an hour.
I haven't seen any sort of speed testing yet. Where's that done?
Right, that would be done in the rig house for the factory.
So we're in this test bay now. That looks as though it's on a Harley Davidson Fat Boy wheel, doesn't it? But that's a special wheel to mount the tyre, obviously.
That's right. This is a static drum test where we would test the tyre for, say, high speed or endurance properties. And these tyres are always tested to destruction point. We test it until we completely destroy the tyre.
So a typical speed is what on that Azzaro that's on there? What would you?
Well, this tyre is rated to V280, which is 175 miles an hour. So if we were doing a high-speed test, we like to make sure that all our tyres, for example, go 2 levels above that. So we would expect that tyre to be capable of doing about 200 miles an hour. This is just the regulatory test needed to give the tyre the coating on the side.
As you were saying before, yeah.
But once all that we've made the tyres, we've built them, we've established the drum test and got all that passed, then the fun part starts, because then you stick it on a motorcycle and then you do some real testing.
And who does that? Do you do that?
I do that, yeah.
All right, well, we shall watch you doing that, but we'll bring you that another time.
In the news this week, visitors to next month's NEC Bike Show will have the chance to win a £10,000 mystery motorcycle in a free-to-enter draw. Also, if you've designed the ultimate in bike security, you can have your invention assessed by a panel of experts at the show. You could even win a prize. And coming up after the break, your chance to win tickets for this year's show and a double bike test, Yamaha's new Fazer and Suzuki's TL1000R. Street bikes, middleweights, all-rounders, whatever you want to call them, that's the class that has become very, very popular lately. Popular because the price is lower than a full-blown super sports bike, but the performance isn't that much different in the real world. And without doubt the one that's done the best is Suzuki's 600 Bandit. But will that change? Well, it just might now that Yamaha have a new weapon. It's called the Fazer. I have to admit that my first impressions of the Fazer were that it looked like a load of old Yamahas stuck together. There certainly seems to be a bit of XJ600 in there, maybe a bit of FJ1200, and one or two other bits and pieces that seem to have been borrowed from previous models. But one thing is for sure, if you covered up all the badges and asked people to name the make, most of them would say it's most definitely a Yamaha. So 10 out of 10 to the design team. The engine too is borrowed from another model. It's the same 600cc inline 4 which powers the Thundercat, and we all know how good that is. It'll produce 95 brake horsepower and take this bike to a top speed of 140 miles per hour. The only big difference is the way the engine is actually mounted in the bike. On the Fazer it's more upright, the Thundercat slopes forward more. Doesn't make much difference, but it has allowed the use of this new double cradle frame. Something else you'll recognise as very Thundercat and even Thunder Ace are these fancy coloured brake calipers. Up at the front here we've got a pair of 4-pot calipers gripping 298mm discs, and they are fantastic, give incredible stopping power, believe me. And at the back, pretty basic, a twin-pot caliper hangs down at the bottom of a 245mm disc. Well, that's most of the boring bits out of the way. Let's go and find out what really matters. The Fazer is a very, very comfortable bike to ride. It's an easy bike to ride. Quite happy to be taken to the office and back 5 days a week, and equally happy giving the boy racers a run for their money along the twisty lanes. High handlebars and a decent sized seat encourage a fairly upright riding position, and with that comes an excellent view of all that's around you, be that traffic in the city or miles of rolling countryside. Power delivery is smooth and progressive from this gorgeous 600cc motor, although I have to say that after a couple of hours in the saddle there was a slightly annoying buzz coming through the foot pegs. A small price to pay, I suppose, for a motor that's as lively as this. So far, so good. But what about this fairing? There's no doubt in its effectiveness. It certainly keeps the wind blast off your chest, and looks quite nice with a pair of twin headlamps up there. But I have heard people say, and I can kind of see why, that it looks like an afterthought, doesn't really look part of the bike, because it's got all this space behind it. It looks like it's just been stuck on. Well, you make your own mind up about that, but for what it's worth, I think it looks great. And I'll tell you something else that's good, and that's this bit, the pillion department, because these rear foot pegs are actually low enough to give your rider a reasonable amount of comfort, to stop him getting that horrible pain in the back of your knees that you get from layers and layers of folded leather. And the seat, as I say, comfy. It's wide enough for you to cover a fair few miles without having to have too many coffee stops. And you can take your key out, plonk it in the little hole there, and the seat comes off to reveal a compartment underneath. Not very big, you might just about get a small U-lock, certainly a disc lock in there, and maybe a pair of very, very thin waterproofs, but not much else. And if you want to enjoy the Fazer at its best, you really don't want to be carrying much else. Flicking it up and down the clunk-free 6-speed box is an absolute joy. Winding it up along the lanes and throwing it into corners is what this bike is all about. It's not got enough raw power to get you really excited. It won't exactly rip your arms out of the sockets, but there's more than enough to get you into serious trouble if you don't show it some respect. All the talk about the Fazer when it became available in early '98 was, will it be as good as the Suzuki Bandit? Will it outsell the Bandit? And what about the Honda Hornet? Well, I have to say, I think it's very unfair to compare this to just those two, because this does so much more. And at just under £5,000 on the road, I think there's one or two sports bikes that might just be in for a little shock.
"12 months ago to this very day, and on a beautiful day like this, I rode the TL1000S. You remember this was the bike that people couldn't handle, or at least some couldn't handle? Well, things have moved on since then, and now we've got the TL1000R, and this is it. So what's so new? The first thing that strikes you on the 1000R is this massive fairing and an equally massive headlight. The S, if you remember, just had the half fairing, and another big difference, which you can't mistake, is the frame. This one's got a beam frame, very much like the GSX, whereas the TL1000S had that trellis frame. And the other distinctive feature is this tail seat unit. The seat itself is massive and very squidgy, but this part here, which rather looks like a duck's rear end, to be perfectly honest, in there is a compartment that, in fact, I reckon you could actually fit your pillion passenger in, let alone on. But you can detach this and put a seat squab on it. You do get the seat squab with the bike, so don't worry about that. But there's more than style about this bike. Style is the sort of minor thing, might be a marketing ploy. But this bike was really designed by Suzuki to be a contender in world superbikes in the future. And so let's look at the sort of technical parts to this. It's got Kayeba upside down forks, Tokiko 6-pot brakes, which are absolutely brilliant. But the trick bits in here, you can actually buy a race kit for this for only £50,000. But nevertheless, you can change the rake and change the trail. You've got replacement yokes you can put in there. You can also put eccentric ball races top and bottom, so you can tilt the forks backwards and forwards. All very clever stuff. So you use the basic frame, but then change it from there. Coming back along here, you can just see one of the twin radiators. The 1000S just had one radiator. This has got two for extra cooling. What you can't see in there, the V-twin engine is basically the same, except it's got twin injectors per cylinder. The old one had just had one. Coming back through the bike, again, massive swinging arm pivot there. You've got a familiar rear shock absorber here. You've got the spring unit, and then the infamous rotary damper, which the press actually criticised a lot, but it seems to work okay to me. It might be a bit restricted in its movement, but it does work. But on this one, they've actually got a temperature compensator, would you believe? So when you're working it hard and the temperature builds up, it opens and closes valves to compensate for the oil getting thinner. So very clever stuff. It's all rounded off by some racing Metzler rubber, which makes it stick to the road like the old proverbial glue. But don't get the impression that you have to make this a race bike, because it's very cool as it is. Both control levers are fully adjustable for handspan. Nice little thumb wheel there. All the controls are very neat, that we've come to expect from Japanese bikes anyway. The forks, as you can see, are fully adjustable for preload and rebound, so no problem there. It's got a steering damper on, which is hardly necessary in my opinion, but it's a non-adjustable one, so you're stuck with the amount of damping that we've got, but no real problems with that. The little dash panel itself is quite neat, very simple as you can see, but it has got a couple of digital displays. On the right is temperature, and on the left is mileage. But not only have you got the fixed mileage, you've also got a little trip recorder with the press of the button there. There we go, giving running one and total trip. Very neat, all works very well. Now obviously there's a good reason for this frame, and as I said earlier, it's not all style. This is a much stronger frame to put up with the rigours of World Superbike racing. Not only that, they've shortened the wheelbase to make it a very compact bike. It's the same length as the Yamaha one. It weighs a bit more, but it's the same overall length. Not only that, they've cleverly shifted the weight forward in any way that they can to keep that front end down, and by golly do you need to keep that front end down. Even the battery they've shoved right up at the front, runs alongside the engine, just behind one of the radiators. Well, that's the hardware, but what you really want to know is how it goes in real life. This is the V-twin that thinks it's a 4. You can hear it's a twin, you can just about feel it's a twin, but performance-wise there are no big bangs. It's super smooth, really revvable, but tractable and very flexible too. It's got power on top from tick over to a ton 70 with 135 brake there for the asking. 10 more than even an SPS, but it just doesn't feel like it. Having said that, the extra injectors are not there for ornament. Gun it away and the front wheel says goodbye to the tarmac. Hook it up through the slick 6-speed box and you'll see 12,000 revs before you know it. Road holding is also good, but on rough roads the rear shock travel felt limited. It didn't cause any problems, it just didn't feel very compliant. Brakes are excellent. The Takiko 6 pots up front are, to be honest, all you need to control this 197 kilos of Japanese hardware. For $8,299 on the road, you have a super bike, alright. Add 50k for the full race kit and you'll have yourself a true superbike, as in World Superbike.
And now here's your chance to win a pair of tickets for this year's NEC show. We all know who won this year's World Superbike Series, but do you know who finished in second place? Answers on a postcard to this address. On Two Wheels next week, Wayne visits Cadwell Park for a rider skills day. Jeff meets up with a drag queen at Santa Pod, and a look at BMW's new sports bike, the R1100S.